Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Frank Quinn. I'm the Director of Preservation, and I am very excited to have a former Heritage Ohio colleague discussing his new book, Your City is Sick. And that person is Jeff Siegler, who actually, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and give tell folks a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on, and it's very good to see you again, Frank. I missed you.
Likewise, likewise.
Yeah, we had a good 10 years working together on East Main Street.
We did, we did.
Um, so yeah, let's see. Grew up in Lima, sweet Lima, Ohio, and after graduating high school, went to school at Ohio Wesleyan. Studied economics, later got interested in land use policy and ended up at the Virginia Commonwealth University's urban planning program. And when I finished there, I took on a job as the Main Street Lancaster in downtown Lancaster executive director. So my very first foray into the Main Street world, which was really cool, and enjoyed that. And then headed up the road to Heritage, Ohio, and worked alongside Frank and Devin and Joyce and everybody for quite a while as the Main Street state coordinator. And then in 2016, I moved to Pittsburgh, and since then started doing my own consulting work under Revitalize or Die. And as Frank mentioned, just this past September, finally published a book, which was kind of a huge pain in the ass, but also very exciting to have done.
So that was all right, everyone. Here's your obligatory cat shot, fresh from the vet.
Okay. What's that cat's name?
Well, if you get a close look at her face, you'll know why we named her Smash Mouth.
Huh.
She is one of those
Not
breeds
just for
with,
love of the band.
and yeah, in loving memory, whatever that lead singer's name was.
R.I.P.
Um, but yeah, so actually, I want to jump in. Um, so it was a little bit after you had left, and I started seeing these posts from you on LinkedIn, and the cat is an all-star. Very nice, Jonathan. Um, so I started seeing these posts from you on LinkedIn, and on a semi-regular basis, it's like Jeff is really hitting all of the right notes when it comes to downtown revitalization and, not surprising what I would hear, if we were both on a site visit or you were speaking to a group in a community. But at some point, I got this sense that there was something more going on. And I think I remember asking you at one point, are you going to put these together in a book form? And you were kind of like, well, stay tuned and see what happens. So I guess I'm curious, did you start writing on LinkedIn because you were like, I'm going to cry into the wind and say what needs to be said? Or were you like, I'm going to put it here, then I'm going to collect it in a book? Or, when did you come to that realization that there was a published piece?
So yeah, bit of the background there. So yeah, when I moved to Pittsburgh, I thought I had a job lined up with a planning firm, and that kind of fell apart. So I had to go back to tend and bar, which was a little rough. And in essence, realized that like through necessity, I had to figure out how to do some consulting work. I didn't want to be behind the bar much longer, and really just kind of came to the conclusion that the only way to get attention would be to sort of speak out and write and kind of say what was on my mind. And I always felt like at the statewide nonprofit at Heritage Ohio, you had to be somewhat careful about what you said. There were politics to play. So yeah, I felt the ability to sort of speak freely a bit and to say some of the things that I felt like needed to be said. So I started just using Facebook and LinkedIn as a way to communicate some of those things that maybe I'd yeah, like I said, held back a bit on saying. So started posting pretty frequently, and honestly, it's what I found that was incredible was the process of writing really sort of led me to new conclusions all the time. It really sort of shifted my thinking, and really has been this incredible sort of gateway to new ideas. And it's funny when I sit down to write. I got really in the habit of trying to write a blog post once a week, and from the first sentence to the last sentence, it was a bit of a journey of discovery. It's like, oh, I never put those things together. I never realized that. And really just doing that process regularly led to a lot of new thinking, and really has sort of fostered kind of my views on revitalization. So, but no, I never really thought of all those regular blog posts as being compiled into a book. And so the book actually is not that. It is not a compilation of those separate posts, but more so like my recent obsession with this idea of how much our places affect our health. So that's where that sprang from.
Mhm. So you mentioned writing the book and it being a bit of a pain. So what was your crash course in all the other piece of it? You can say it's easy to put the content together, but then all of us people who have no idea, like what's the 30-second or 60-second summary of how you get from that to having, something I can hold in my hands.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the content wasn't so bad because I'm used to it. I'm used to writing, 1,500 words a week or whatever. So I just stuck with that. I did a blog post one day, and then try to do another 1,500 words for the book on another day of the week. And over the course of a year, I was completed with that. But then it was another year and a half before the thing finally got published, which was, I looked around for a publisher for 6 months, gave myself that sort of time to try to find somebody, and that proved to be a dead end. Then I had to go through and do all the editing, and man, I must have read it 70 times for editing. And then I pick it up now, and it's like, oh, there's an error, there's an error, there's an error. And then, Ben Muldrow was kind enough to do the pagination and cover work, and that, Ben's a pretty busy guy, so there were 6 months that went into having all that done. And I mean, it's a lot of work to take what's basically like a Word document and turn it into a book. So it got to the point of like, this is no longer any fun. I want it to be over. So I'm glad that I did it, but I'm also glad that it's done.
So you might be one and done in the book authoring world, perhaps.
I wouldn't do it again by myself. If there was ever an opportunity to do it with a actual publisher, I would certainly entertain the idea, but not by myself.
So, it's interesting reading through that book, and you touched on it a little bit, that the communities of Lima, Lancaster, and Pittsburgh have really shaped kind of like different chapters of your life. And so I guess I wonder, can you make easy compares and contrasts to those three communities? I mean, they're all different places, but do you ever have I didn't expect this thing to happen in Pittsburgh, or thinking back to things that might have happened in Lancaster or even Lima growing up. Are they all really unique, or are there similarities among all of them?
I think one of the things that really struck me is that, I guess I realized in living in different places that there's a certain sense of self-esteem, a certain sense of a certain sense of civic self-esteem that attaches to an individual. And that's kind of something that I've found fascinating. And I don't want to, I want to be careful not to sound like I'm trashing my hometown. There's plenty of wonderful people there working to make it better. But simultaneously, like I found, my experience there is people have a really negative relationship with their community. They don't, there's always that person that's going to look at, say, an old car and say, I can fix that up. And in the Main Street world, certainly, I think we're all the type of people that can look at a rundown building and say, hey, I can clean that up. I see the beauty and the potential in this building. And I think Lima is the type of community where the vast majority of people look at the community and they're like, I don't like it, it sucks, it's beneath me, or not beneath me, but they just have a very difficult relationship. It's like there's something about this community that doesn't make me proud, so I'm going to distance myself in the way I speak about it and how I relate to it. And Lancaster was kind of in the middle ground of that. It was, I don't think it had suffered some of the same sort of mistakes and urban renewal mistakes that Lima did. It was sort of in that we're working it out phase. It's like, you're not perfect, I'm not perfect, but we're willing to stick this out. There are parts of self-esteem, there was glimpses of hope on the horizon. So that was much different. And it still took a lot of hard work. But it wasn't this constant fight against negativity. There was some of it, but there was also plenty of optimistic people. And then in Pittsburgh, I find that it's a lot more people with a lot, there's a lot more civic self-esteem in my neighborhood. People have a better relationship with their community, and there's less of that sort of battle, it just that constant, it wears you down after a while, to always be up against people that, the complaining on Facebook or whatever it was, no matter what idea somebody comes up with, that won't work here. So that's something I guess I really learned in those three experiences, that how people view how their community, the appearance, how it looks, how it feels, how it operates, really affects people, how not only their relationship with their community, but also kind of their own sense of self, their own self-esteem. And it was anybody that's ever lived in a community or visited a community where it's like, why would you move here? That's a lot of low civic self-esteem. That's a little bit of self-loathing at work, and it's hard to overcome.
Is there any correlation in the fact that maybe you could look at downtown Lima, downtown Lancaster, and your suburbs in Pittsburgh? Like, they all have different car hierarchies. How many people use cars? How many events are pedestrian-oriented events? Does that figure into the equation? Is it that easy to?
Yeah, in a way, yes. I think that how I look at that is that, the sort of the more we cherish cars, sort of the more space we give to cars, the worse things look. The uglier they become, the worse off it is for local business. It's just, you're going to have less attractive buildings. You're just going to have, think about it this way, that our communities 100 years ago had a lot that made us proud. They had a lot a lot of beauty. There was a lot of local ownership. There were all these things that made people feel really good about them. And the more of that went away, the less people care. It's not people's fault. We often blame people. It's like, kids these days don't care. What's wrong with people? They're not engaged in the community anymore. And it's like, stop blaming people for having this incredibly rational response to a shift in their environment. Like all the people of Lima didn't change. The nature of the community changed. The downtown buildings, the ones that really mattered, that were pretty, that were cute, that gave people a sense of pride, that had names, up on those were allowed to fall apart. And then a bunch of Walmarts and, vinyl garbage was built in instead. It's like, so that's a real natural response. It's like, I can care about this 5-story brick building. I can't care at all about this 1-story vinyl disaster. So yeah, I think, yes, is the point. Like, the more that we abandon the pretty part of town and the local part of town by way of the car, the worse things have gotten. So, I think you look at German Village in Columbus, or you look at a neighborhood like Over the Rhine, or think of Lawrenceville in Pittsburgh, like, those three neighborhoods have changed the very least in 100 years. And they're also the most popular and best neighborhoods today. Like, that should show you something. Like, we had it right then. Small scale, human scale, local business, cute, like pedestrian friendly. We can't improve upon that.
So, and then, excuse me. So in Lima, there are smart folks there who are like, we don't like this. We're ready to make a change, do something different. And I think what happened in Lima has probably been played out all across the country over the last few decades. And the Main Street approach has certainly been one of the most popular downtown revitalization initiatives that have been used. So I'm curious, you've been very involved in it. Um, and so what do you think downtown revitalization leaders are getting right about what it takes to revitalize a community? But also, what do you think they're getting wrong about what it takes to revitalize a community?
And I'm gonna start with right. So, gosh, where is it? First off, Main Street program is wonderful, and I'm a big believer in it. I think it makes a ton of sense to have an organized effort with staff, with community leaders, all pushing in the same direction. So, I'll say that in that sense, they're getting it right, and also just playing up to my audience. But no, I think what is getting it wrong is like I just too much money is thrown at tourism and economic development, and it drives me crazy. Like those things don't necessarily, like all great people that work in those industries, well, mostly great people, no, wonderful people that work in that. So I'm certainly not trying to smear anybody that works in those, but I don't think that those industries are making a big dent. Too many resources go towards them. And so why I think that is like a couple things that are happening. One is it's this idea, it's too externally focused. Economic development is like, well, if companies, some of it is growing from within, some of it is how do we attract from outside. Tourism is certainly how do we attract from outside. And it's this idea of, hey, if we can get some external validation, we'll be good. Will people come here and like us? And that's just not how, that's not how humans work. It's like, how many Hollywood stories we saw of somebody where like, oh, I just wanted to be famous so people would love me. It's like, yeah, that's broken. That doesn't work. We have to love ourselves. We have to fix our own problems. And so that's one area where I see a lot of misspent money, is this idea of external validation instead of fixing it ourselves. Like you don't need a developer from out of town to do a damn thing. You need to foster local real estate development. You don't
Mhm.
need, and so those are areas where I find a lot of frustration of just if somebody from outside is going to come and save us and fix everything, and it's just not the case. To an area where I think that there needs to be a lot more that we could do a lot better is in real estate development. There's a lot of
Mhm.
focus on small business development, but if you don't have the space to put them, like if you have a bunch of empty buildings or rundown buildings, like I don't care how many great businesses you have, it doesn't matter. We need the space first. Like when a downtown is pretty, the businesses show up. I always remember talking with I was thinking back to the mayor of Medina, Hanley, I believe was the mayor's name at the time. And we're like, why do you keep putting so much money into the square? And he's like, every year I put more money into the square, more people show up. More people show up, more retail sales, higher rent, higher property value. And then the people want to live closer to that. So they'll pay more for their house, like simply in making it pretty and dressing up and dealing with the aesthetics and simultaneously fixing the real estate part, like everything else fell into place. So I just less focus on business development, a lot more on finding and building local developers. Cause I think of, yeah, I mean, what was it? Delaware is a good example. They
Mhm.
a couple of guys figured out how to develop real estate, and that became sort of that was such a huge part of their revitalization. So that's my thinking.
So that it's interesting that you mentioned that. So chapter 18 in your book is titled Provide Ownership. And you make some great arguments in there about the benefit of bringing more people into the role of becoming real stakeholders in their central business districts. So if a community is in, quote unquote, the action phase of doing downtown revitalization, what could be done to help provide more opportunity for that local ownership?
Sure. So I think a lot of it comes from some building departments. First off, most people don't think that that's even an option. If you were to go to most people in the community and say, hey, would you like to become a property owner? Would you like to become a developer? I don't think anybody has idea that's even a thing. So part of it is educational and informational, just letting people know that. But that's going to be a shift from the municipality to say, hey, we have to retool our departments, both economic development and the building department, away from just getting more vinyl strip malls built and too local. Like I'm guessing that for the most part, if you called your local building department and said, hey, I'm interested in renovating this 3-story building, you'd probably get a lot of bad information. They'd probably tell you it can't be done. They'd probably tell you, elevators and sprinklers. And
Hmm.
so I think there just needs to be and from the top, I think more mayors need to say, hey, building department, figure out local, figure out how to get more people doing these buildings. If we have codes in the way, we need to change the codes. If our building code enforcement people don't know the real, the international business code and how to work with historic buildings, figure it out, and then market it. There's always this sort of myth that you have to be already rich to become a developer, and that's absolutely not the case. You leverage, you borrow money. So I think a lot of people in the community, you already have contractors, you're already going to have people that are in and around that area and working in real estate. They would very likely be interested, but they don't know, or they think that it's an impossibility.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. It reminds me of Bernice Radel, the developer in Buffalo, and she talked about once her first building redevelopment where she found a mentor and was someone who had experience. And how did she set it up? It's like, hey, go in halfsies with me, and then, oh, by the way, can you lend me my half of the capital? So it's like if you're lucky enough to find a mentor and to find someone who has the capital behind them, what a great opportunity to learn.
Yeah, Bernice is such a great example. I mean, I think she was probably 25 when she bought her first building. She didn't have any money, but she says that it's like she couldn't not do it. That her drive, her passion to renovate this one building was so great that, yeah, she spoke to somebody in town that had a little bit more money, and that's her start. And now she has a property management company, a real estate development company, and has been incredibly successful. So, it is not an impossibility for anybody to renovate a building. It's just a matter of connecting a few dots. Like, honestly, I think the best thing to do would be for any community is walk through that process, pick a building in your downtown and imagine that you are going to redevelop it, and go through the process, approach the city, find out, like map out the process and see where all the roadblocks are, what all the headaches are. Is it financing? You can fix that. Is it a building department issue? You can fix that. Is it, existing codes? You can fix all those things. But if you don't know where the friction points are, if you don't know where all the roadblocks are, you're not going to be able to fix it. But once you get one done, what I've seen more often than not is then the second one becomes easier than the third one. And then they all sort of fall like dominoes, but it's that first one that's really tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I am starting to regret my decision to do this at home. Um, I'm going to do a cat extraction here real quick. And while I'm doing that, I will let everyone who's attending today, I'll say thank you for joining us. And if you have a question for Jeff, feel free to put the question in the chat box. Devin from our office is helping out, kind of policing the chat. So, all right. I am once again cat free, hopefully for the rest of the webinar. So in your book, you talk about the tourism money, maybe not the best expenditure the way some of the tourism entities do it. And that Main Street, kind of at its core, it's a good approach. But I'm curious, like say you were made the king of Main Street for a day, what would you change about the 4-point approach, or what would you add to it, or what would you take away?
A couple of things that come to mind. One, I think that, well, I was going to say this isn't specifically the Main Street, but one, I do wish that preservation organizations were much more about just good design in general. That I think that sometimes there can be too much of a focus on just saving old buildings, and then that overlooks the opportunity to just advocate for great design. But that's not necessarily Main Street. The couple areas where I guess I always push back against some of the Main Street mantras was one that I think it's less important to have. I think that projects should be more of the focus than the committee. It's really hard to ask somebody to volunteer on a committee. Hey, would you like to join our economic vitality committee? And, I don't know, there's no term of service. It could be 5 years. I have no idea what you're going to work on. How does that sound? Like, that's actually terrible. No, thank you. But if you said, hey, we're going to try to come up, we're going to try to create a facade improvement program, or we're going to try to, codify some new design guidelines. Like that's easier to think of who might be interested. It's a lot easier to ask, and it's a whole lot easier to say yes to. So I do believe that there's more use in identifying projects and then finding volunteers and then figuring out which committee they sit under than it is just to have these standing committees. The other thing that I never really was too crazy about, and this kind of was implemented on my way out, but was the transformational strategies. It just, to me, it always felt a little gimmicky. Like, I don't think a community is a gimmick. I don't think that you have to be a college town or this thing town. I think that every town just needs to serve its residents. Like every single town could have the same 20 businesses. That's fine. If you can serve your residents with the hardware store and with the with the pizza shop and a convenience store, like you don't need to have any specific strategy. You don't need to be the best at anything. It's really all these towns are in. No one's in competition with one another. They should just serve their local residents much better.
Hey, Devin.
Go through some of these questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the first question is from Kenny. Jeff, can you speak a little bit more about the difference between civic pride, civic self-esteem, and civic apathy?
Sure. So I think that what I kind of figured out when I was, in the past few years of doing this is that it was experience of, honestly, it was a couple communities in Ohio that you would have to visit would get to visit on a regular basis, but the experience of going to those communities was always depressing. And some of you probably had that experience or maybe know the towns, but going back to them every year was always a really hard day. It just took a lot out of you. And I remember thinking like, oh, why is it that going to this, these few towns over here always drains me so much? And I realized like, yeah, they feel run down. There's always infighting. Nobody ever has any trust. There's just always there's this dysfunction that just wears you down. And I thought, man, that's hard for me. And then it's like, oh my God, they live here. And like, how does that affect them? And every year I'd go back to those communities and like, this will be the year that they turn the corner and nothing changed. And that really dawned on me that like, oh, what we're dealing with isn't this technical issue. We keep trying to say, well, get a grant or do a plan and that's going to fix it. And it dawned on me like, well, yeah, but they're apathetic. They don't care. They've been beaten down to the point where they don't care. And so our suggestions, our technical solutions just weren't working. And so, yeah, that dawned on me. It's like apathy is a very different problem, and most of our communities are facing it. Most of our communities have seen the decline in things that matter. They've seen the pretty buildings go away. They've seen the local jobs go away. They've seen their sense of community dwindle, and all those things that are easy to get attached to have in turn, really declined. So there's less to be attached to. There's less to care about. So apathy is a very, if you had a beautiful home and then you stopped maintaining it, you'd grow apathetic about it. After year 5 of not cleaning, of not doing the chores or the maintenance of ownership, you would grow apathetic about your home. And that would change who you are. Like when we don't care about many things, it changes who we are, it changes how we feel and how we behave. And so that's the idea of civic apathy, of just not being able to muster concern about the place that you call home, which again, I don't blame people for doing. That's a very natural response to declining surroundings. It's hard to care about things that have declined. It's easy to care about things that are cute and pretty. So the pride is the antithesis of apathy. And that is another thing that I realized through kind of visiting all these communities at Heritage Ohio, and since that apathy is not caring about something, pride is caring a great deal about something. And so when you have pride in something, you tend to it, you take care of it, you show it off, and it lifts you up. It makes you feel better about yourself. And so when we're proud of our towns, we feel good about them. We share, we post about them, we share photos of them, we tell other people about them. And that sense of being from a town makes you feel better. And so that's where this idea of self-esteem, like, does your town make you feel better about yourself? Civic pride is the idea of like, this thing I care a great deal about, so I'm going to take care of it. Civic self-esteem is sort of this idea, and they're absolutely intertwined, but it's like, my town makes me feel good about myself. It lifts up me and how I feel. Like, this is a town that just by moving to a place, it's one thing to move to a place that was like, why would you move here? And it's another, it's like, of course you would move here. This place is amazing and it makes us all feel good. So that's where I get that. And that brings me to another idea that I think is really important to hit on. It's like, that we get wrong. Frank, you asked earlier, like, what do we get wrong? And I think that we just get too technical with our community stuff. Like, we put too many finance golf guys in charge of things. And it's like, well, if we just know numbers and acronyms, everything will be fine. But that overlooks the fact that communities are incredibly emotional. Like, if your town doesn't make you feel good, you fail. It's not doing what it should be. It should make you feel good. We chase places that make us feel good. You know, we don't travel just to look at pretty buildings. We travel to feel a little bit pretty. We travel to feel a sense of joy and to feel a sense of happiness. So we're always chasing those places that make us feel good. The experience of walking down German Village is joyful. It's happy. It's fun. You know, it's a shame that we have so few of those places, that they're so that they're so pricey. But a place should make you feel good. It should give you a sense of dignity, a sense of sophistication. It should be fun. It should be social. And so that's sort of where I think that sometimes it's okay to say no to the banker that's just like, well, no, that's too expensive. It's like, well, expense isn't the only way to make a decision. You know, if the county courthouse is the thing that you're most proud of, that was a decision that was not about cost. That was a decision that was about value. It was about emotion. That was a decision about who we are as a community. And if we just make every decision about cost, we are going to fail residents, and we're never going to recoup any of those investments, because we don't care about cheap things. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. What else do we have, Devin?
Is Jeff, what are your thoughts about working with rural areas, and they're defining this as less than 1,000 people, and getting them open to more mixed-use buildings and apartments?
Sure. That's a battle I've had many a time, and it's tricky because what I run into, it's like, yeah, I love working with rural areas, but there seems to be a lot of the idea of good urbanism. Let me jump back. I think this idea of urban and rural has created a real big divide, and it's causing a lot of problems. Like, urban is of city or town. That's the definition of the word urban, of city or town. Rural is of the countryside, of the countryside, or of a natural landscape. I'm getting it a little wrong there, but the word urban has become so vilified, and now we just use it as a stand-in for like dense crime place or something. And like, so I think there's a lot of pushback then in rural areas, smaller towns, I should say, of building with any density, of this idea of good urbanism. Like, we need density. Every town, a town of 500 that was built 100 years ago still had some density. Like, farmers all brought their crops into a central marketplace. Everything had to come into a place. We've had it. That's the model of civilization. That's the model of towns for thousands and thousands of years, that you would have a little hub where people would bring their produce to market, and then people would live near that because it was good access to the things that they needed to get along. So, but there's this huge pushback, and I think a lot of it is political identity. It's like, we're not that. And it's like, but man, that's what people still crave. You might not want to live in a big city, but that doesn't mean that you don't want density. It doesn't mean that you don't want walkability, because in fact, I found it pretty much universally, like, people do appreciate those things. Like, yes, most people do like those sorts of places. Most people do value those sorts of places. And so there's nothing wrong with that. So I think it's a matter sometimes of kind of using a different language, or honestly, this was really interesting. I was in Iowa over the summer, and we kind of had this come up, and there's the community self-identified as like, no, we don't want any more density, we don't want any more housing downtown, we don't want any of these things. And there was a community-wide survey that came out, and it asked people what they thought, and it's like everybody wanted the same things. It's like, oh yeah, well, there was a really funny one, sorry, but they're like, more housing downtown. Everybody said no. And it's like, would you live downtown? 80% said yes. Well, I would. So we're always dealing with this notion of like, here's what I want, but that's not what my community wants, which is a sort of civic self-esteem thing as well. But it's like, Frank, I think I remember once when we were in Steubenville, we kind of ran into this. We were asking the community, it's like, who here would the community support a steakhouse, something like that? And everybody said, absolutely not. No. And then we rephrased the question. It's like, would you support a steakhouse if it moved in? And like 90% of people said yes. So there's always this like, well, I like nice things, but these idiots that I live around don't.
Right. It's like, my community doesn't deserve to have something nice.
Low civic self-esteem communities always behave that way. It's like, well, yeah, I might like a nice bookstore, or I might like a nice coffee shop, or I might like this restaurant, or I would like to live in upper floor housing, but that wouldn't work in this community. And I think a bit of what goes on is like, well, we don't have it, so we don't want it. And it's like, ooh, that's you're confusing supply and demand. Just because you don't have something doesn't mean you don't want it. So I know there's a long-winded way of getting at this answer, but I've pretty much universally found that most everyone gravitates towards good density, towards pretty places. Like everybody likes pretty places. Most everybody would like to be able to walk to a couple shops and have that experience, even if farmers would still like to be able to come into town and be able to walk to a few things and get a few things done together. So maybe it's a change in how we speak about these things. Maybe it's pointing out that this isn't, some sort of progressive agenda. Like good urbanism is ancient, like walkable cities are ancient. That's what our grandparents had. It's what people gravitate towards, and it's not going to hurt anyone.
Our next question here sort of has the same kind of feel to the question, but this applies pretty much to everyone. What approach do you recommend for property owners that do not engage and do not really care about their building or their downtown?
Find the shit out of them. I'm pretty adamant about we need to be much better about enforcing building codes. Like we're so lax on it, and there's nothing more damaging to a community's sense of sense of self-esteem than looking at a bunch of rundown vacant buildings. It's awful. That becomes so ingrained in who a community is. If the most important buildings are sitting empty and they're falling apart, then you're going to have a real tough time of being proud of your community. Like that's your identity. Those buildings are the identity of your town. Nobody puts the Walmart up on their city logo. Nobody's getting photos in front of the Dollar General. Like those buildings are a community's identity, and when they're allowed to decline, a community's identity follows suit. So enforce building codes, enforce them. There is absolutely no reason not to. I don't understand our desire to protect the deadbeats. Like I don't care if someone's feelings hurt. They're not concerned about hurting everyone else's property value, so we shouldn't be so concerned. I think it's just adamant. And some of the best ways I've seen it done, I always remember that Millersburg was so smart when they wanted to pass the vacant property registry. They went to the building owners that had already fixed up. Like they went to the guy in town that had already put a bunch of money into a building, and they said, you should be the biggest advocate for this. You should be the one that's championing this. And it's hard for council to say like, oh, well, screw you, pal. Like, no, you're like, oh yeah, I realize that you put a bunch of money into the community, and now because we refuse to enforce codes, how this hurts. Or Sandusky, they pushed the vacant property registry through with the fire department. Fire chief got up and said, I don't want to send my people into these buildings anymore. It's too dangerous. So I think that there are strategies to get it done to make that point. But I remember back to a community in what it was, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And one of the, we were walking through this with the mayor and some bankers and developers. And in essence, they were always of the opinion in Hattiesburg that it's like red tape will scare away investment. We don't want to do this. We don't want a bunch of red tape and building codes and design codes because people don't like red tape and they'll avoid it. And it's like, no. You're forgetting about this idea of risk. Investors are much more concerned with risk. And the idea that there's no building codes, that's the riskiest thing I've ever heard of. No one wants to invest in a place, the only people that want to put their money in a place like that are enticed by the wrong reasons. They want to do bad things, but if you put in quality regulations, if you enforce those codes and have some design standards, what you're doing is mitigating risk. And that's really attractive. And that's going to attract a lot more investment in the end. So if there's anything that you do or anything that you take from this, work to build a coalition to get your city to start enforcing building codes, get the deadbeats out so that you can replace them with people that are going to care and put some money back into those properties.
I want to hit on that. Chapter 20 is titled Raise Your Standards. I want to read a passage from that real quickly to share with everyone.
New. I've never had this happen.
Share with everyone who's joining us today. So in this, you write, the sprawl economy delivered its low standards onto us, but plenty of us have helped carry the ball forward. Every time you pass a downtown building falling apart, you are witnessing the lowering of standards. You are seeing a city's pride slip away. You're looking upon something that once mattered, but now no longer does. Our town founders built our cities with pride. They busted their asses to build beautiful buildings. Craftsmen with old world skills and locally sourced materials made structures that were meant to lift us up. Buildings that they knew would shape us, So they took the time to build them right. These buildings were meant to stand the test of time. Those builders understood that if we simply maintained our standards and simultaneously maintained their buildings, they would stand indefinitely. Build them right the first time, and generations could enjoy them. We betrayed them. We keep betraying them. So, powerful
Really?
excerpt. I would love to have everyone who has a copy of this book, or to get a copy of this book, print out that passage, tape it to the front window of the shittiest looking building in your downtown, to send the message that until we, as in like everyone in the community that has a voice and wants to use it, until everyone is about raising standards, it's not going to get better. And it's something that we see in downtown revitalization. It's like those communities where you go in and things just keep looking a little incrementally worse each time that you go to that downtown. And we have conversations about it internally. And it really is about those standards, and that you're incentivizing the wrong kind of people to be hanging out and not even investing in your downtown, but owning a building and extracting from it.
That was I appreciate you reading that. I've never had that happen, so that was kind of exciting. But right, I mean, I sort of forgot I wrote that, and it still, that hits home. It still is. Yeah, it's a little raw because it was Winston Churchill that said we shape our buildings thereafter they shape us, and that's always stuck with me, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you realize how much your emotions are affected by the place, that your surroundings. If you walk down, any of us, you walk into a church, you might feel a sense of awe. You walk into a beautiful restaurant, where it's like, oh, I want to take my partner out to a romantic restaurant. When you walk in, you're going to see, there's going to be certain lighting. There's going to be certain things that make you, that cultivate that mood. There's certain buildings that are going to make you feel reverence, but there's also going to be places that make you feel sad, that make you feel a sense of despair. If you look down a street and you're like, oh, I bet you a bunch of criminals and addicts live on that street, like, think about what you're saying. You're looking at the design cues and making assumptions about who lives there, and you're not wrong. The point being is that's what happens when we are surrounded by decline. We decline ourselves. Like, the cost of letting those buildings fall apart is people's opinion of themselves, people's sense of civic pride. I mean, not to get into the financial cost, but it really is how people view themselves, which in turn then changes how people talk about themselves, what kind of decisions they make for themselves, how they treat others. Like, we become different people just by going to different places. So, a beautiful downtown is going to create and foster a different type of citizen. And an empty, falling down dead one is going to create a lot of people that are distrustful, that are negative, that there's going to be a lot of infighting. Like, a lot of it just comes from those surroundings. And so, that's why we change, like, you design one room in your home to feel a certain way and another room to feel a different way, because you know how those things affect us. Like, it's the same with the center of our town. So there's a huge cost to letting those buildings fall apart. So I appreciate your highlighting that, Frank.
Sure. Devin, do we have some other questions?
Oh, yes. It was a perfect segue for the next question. Next question is, we have a community that seems to be living in victim mode, meaning the city is the fault for everything and should be financially paying for everything. The city does not have funding to manage every aspect of our community, such as trash and beautification and helping existing businesses. How do we start to change this mentality in our community?
Yeah, that's a good one, and certainly pretty common. It's funny, I also find those towns to be they have this funny sort of dichotomy of, like, I hate the city, but I want the city to fix everything. Like
Mm.
government's the problem, but will government please solve everything? Like, huh. So I see that a lot. And I think that that's kind of part of that dysfunction that I think that does breed a bit from apathy. And it's that reminder, or it's that lack of knowledge that we have a relationship with our community, that our choices, like we have a part to play, and like the city can't do everything. And I think that we need to, that's the slow steps, I guess, of building back. Like this is no surprise, it's gonna be a bit of a long-winded answer, but like when through rampant apathy and kind of the dysfunction that breeds, we get into a really low place where nobody trusts one another, everything's negative, and nobody believes that tomorrow will be better today, and it's just all a lot of arguing, and it's all a lot of negativity, and that's really hard to overcome. But I do think that there's ways to do it, and I look at it the same way as that we would pick our own selves up. If you were down in the dumps, if you were depressed, if you were struggling, the recipe to come out of that isn't, well, here's a huge plan. The recipe isn't, well, just here's some money or whatever. Like the real recipe to something like that is we've got to get a bunch of small victories. We've got to build up ourselves. Maybe it's getting out of bed today. Maybe it's going for a walk tomorrow. And so my belief in that is like, it takes a while, but the way to get started is to do small things. Like invite a few people over and go pick up trash on Saturday mornings. Like make that a routine. Small victories, create a punch list for the downtown. Maybe it's scraping some paint, maybe it's pulling some weeds, but that's going to take a lot of small victories, and it's going to take building social networks. It's going to take building social ties, of bringing people back together and helping them realize that, look, there is something here that we've lost, but that's worth fighting for. Like there's no good quick answer for that. And that's why this is certainly my answer is quick, but like, that's what's hard about real revitalization, is that the actual answer is really complicated. I'm sorry, it's not complicated. It's simple, but it's not easy. And it's like getting in shape or losing weight. Like it's not hard. I'm sorry. It's not complicated. It is hard. It's like fixing up the surroundings relentlessly is what revitalization really looks like. It just takes a lot of work. Like getting in shape, yeah, you know what to do, but it takes a lot of work. So at the end of the day, I think that what is the process to fix all that dysfunction is being relentless about fixing the surrounding, fixing the environment. And I know that might seem overly simplistic, but honestly, it's not. Honestly, like we in community development do this weird thing where we think everybody should feel the same way we do. We think that everybody should be passionate about their community. We think that everybody should look at a rundown block and see the beauty in it. That's not the case. You all in Main Street, like you all are the weirdos that look at a rundown building or a rundown downtown and see the beauty in it. Stop expecting everybody else to do that. Find a few people that do though, and work relentlessly to improve things. Like just keep going, just keep making things nicer, because what you see time and time again is when things get a little bit nicer, a few more people get won over, a few more people have hope and optimism, and a few more people get involved. And then it can start to build a landslide, but you're just going to have to keep showing up, and you're going to have to keep doing it day in and day out forever. I always think, the stories that Francis told about when they first started First Fridays, like it was 3 people stood around for the first year staring at each other, but eventually it became this huge event that everybody came out to. Like, yeah, you're just going to have to do a lot of work every day to build up that sense of self-esteem, that sense that we can do something, that we can make a difference, that we can make a change. And that will eventually remind people that it's their responsibility to clean their sidewalk. It's their responsibility to mow their front yard, or to clean their storefront. But it's a long way to get there. And it's a tough road, but that's the only path. And that's why it's not popular. And that's why no one sells it, because the truth is it takes a long time and it's hard.
It's a lot like, I'm sorry,
ahead,
Devin. I was just going to say it's a lot like saving an old building. Like 99% of the time, it's the right thing to do. 1% of the time, it'll be the easy thing to do. But you've got to keep that in mind. What's the right step to take? And it's not hardly ever going to be the easy step to take. And so often, I think you've got to steer people. They're on that easy track. You've got to steer them back onto the right track.
Right. I mean, you're working against decades of mistrust, of people feeling like they've been lied to, feeling like, oh, tomorrow, like you're dealing with a lot of trauma. You're dealing with generations of sort of this trauma and watching your community decline. So I think we shouldn't get too upset with people for being apathetic or disengaged or discouraged. But here's the thing that I think is really cool, or that should at the heart give everybody a sense of optimism, is that human nature will prevail. Like, everybody would rather feel happy than sad. Everybody would rather be trustful than distrustful. Every human would rather have a cute downtown than an ugly one. Like, and the gift of volunteering, like when we do work, when we give to our community, it feels great. Like, that is scientifically proven, is that donating your time to a cause bigger than you absolutely lifts your spirit. So we have human nature on our side in all of these things. Yes, people have acclimated to a bad situation over the decades, but human nature will prevail. So, like, keep moving forward relentlessly with these ideas that when more people get involved, they will be happier. When the conditions improve, people will feel better. But and one other thing to insert there, it's like, Craig, please have some fun. Like, please make it fun. Please stop having your meetings at City Hall in the basement at 6 p.m. Like, lighten up this stuff. Unless you're going to make it social, unless you're going to have a little fun with it, you're going to push everybody away and scare them off. Like, make this stuff as fun as possible. Make it a party, invite everybody, and like just lighten up a bit, so that make it easy to say yes to getting involved with your organization, and just count on human nature at the end of the day, that ultimately all people want to feel a certain way, and trust in that and work towards that.
What else do you have, Devin?
All right, next question, Jeff. Kind of going off of what you've been talking about a little bit, but how can people improve their partnership with their city government?
I think, a lot of that should be meetings outside of meetings, asking council people to sit down for lunch on a regular basis, understanding that, for one, like, not all council members actually know. Like, I see this a lot, is that somebody's like, my community's struggling and I want to do something. I want to get involved. I want to make a difference. Then they do that. They run for office, they get involved, but then they don't really know what to do. They're not really sure of what to do. They ran for office. They didn't necessarily know how to revitalize a community. They could use a hand. They could use some education. So sit down with them, explain what you're doing, make them look good. Just like, try to look at it from their point of view, and help them understand what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that should be for council, that should be for your mayor or city manager. Have your board member facilitate those meetings or those connections. But just the work that you are doing is altruistic. It's beneficial for the community. It's going to lift up all those other departments. It's going to lift up all those other nonprofits in the community, especially in municipalities. So I just think, like, put down your, like, hide your fangs if you're angry for whatever the city's done in the past. It doesn't matter. Start to build bridges and just educate them on what it is that you're trying to do. Because if they're in it to try to make your community better, which most elected officials are, they should be supportive. But likely they don't really know, and that's okay. Help them learn.
So you touch on getting kids involved, or not getting kids involved. You touch on getting people involved, but in your book you also, and it's a question that we get, it's like, that's separate. How do you get adults involved? How do you get kids involved? I'm going to do another quick excerpt from your book, where you write, in every town I work, people ask me how to get the kids engaged. They want to know how to keep the graduates around and why they are more appreciative of their community. I look at the main street that has been turned into a highway, the empty buildings, the lack of places to go, and the near non-existent social life that has been offered up to these kids. And I have to ask myself, why the hell would anyone stay? All the places where social bonds used to be formed have been removed. So what is there to keep someone? What roots would a kid even have?
Yeah. So that came out of an experience I had out in Eastern Washington last year. And I was working with this a pretty small farming town, and what was really communicated so much was like, hey, how do we keep the kids from all graduating and leaving? What are we doing wrong? And I had to point out to them somewhat the obvious. It's like, look, when you were growing up here, or when your parents were growing up here, you had the annual gala, you had the sock hop, you had all these things that were these social opportunities to do. You gave people a chance to make friends and hang out and be social. Simultaneously, this was before you put a 4-lane highway through your main street. So you had this pretty downtown where people all could convene and hang out, and it made them feel good, and they could shop locally and feel like they'd had a place to create social ties, and they had this aesthetic that made them feel really good about their place, and there was all this local ownership. Like, why would you even think to leave a place that felt that good? But here it was, you took this beautiful gift, you trashed it, you wrecked it, and then you're like, here's garbage, why don't you like it? It's like, that's a natural thing for people not to gravitate towards this thing that's not that nice anymore, that's not that pretty, that's not that special, that's not locally owned, that you have no connection to, that's not that social. So I do come back to this, like, stop blaming people for responding to a community that has declined. Like, it's not their fault. That's a very natural response. You just have to fix it up. You have to make it nicer. Like, bring back those social opportunities, make everything as cute as possible. Stop being so frustrated at kids for leaving. They're chasing a feeling. Okay. Like, I go to places to feel good. All right. Like, if there's a part of town that makes me feel alive and vibrant or sophisticated or cute or whatever it is, like, I'm going to go there. If I travel to places to feel that same thing. If a kid feels run down in your community, they should seek out somewhere else to go. If it doesn't make them feel happy or joyful or special or social, they should seek it out. So fix that. Create a place that makes people feel good and where they connect with others, that makes them feel rooted.
Devin, any other questions?
Sure. A few I will answer very quickly. Yes, there will be a recording of this webinar today. It'll be up on our YouTube channel probably in the next 24 hours or so. We'll send out a message to everyone when it's posted, so you should be getting that. And also, just for the question of which Delaware are we talking about? We're talking about Delaware, Ohio. So our next question here, how do you build civic pride? It seems like once someone starts painting, it catches fire, but how do you even start with it? I work for a county, and it's work. It's hard to work in some cities because they feel like they're stuck. I want to try something with storytelling and have newcomers and transplants tell their stories and why they chose to live there. Do you think something like that might change the negative narrative in our communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 parts of this answer. One, I think the easiest way to build civic pride is improve aesthetics. That, like, anytime that, a simple way to feel like when we get a haircut or a new suit or something, we feel a little bit better. But I mean, that's a little bit external, but it still helps. But I think, like, the best fitness plan in the world isn't as meaningful as going for a jog. So start small, the little things. I mean, it does start with pulling weeds and picking up trash. It starts with the smallest things. You're going to get sold all the time, do this huge big thing and everything gets better. Like, that's like being told, take this pill and you'll be in shape, and buy this weight and you'll be in shape. Like, that does not, like, sure, the Bowflex will get you healthier if you use it every day for 5 years. Like, it's the work that you have to do. A plan is great, but if you don't do the year's worth of work, so start small, truly do the little things. But to your point about the storytelling, I'm a huge fan, and the best example of this, I think, is Phil Ike up in Saginaw, Michigan. So Phil is really incredible, and he was doing a lot of marketing for small businesses when the city of Saginaw posted a RFP, basically saying, "Hey, we want somebody to do like marketing and PR for the Riverfront district," I think it was. And Phil approached him and was like, "Yeah, here's what I won't do is try to sell your community to people that live 3 towns over. What I will do is sell your community to the people that already call it home." It's like, because that's who you need on board. That's who you need to be fans. So he started this beautiful campaign of kind of like a Humans of New York, where he started telling the story of everybody that lived in Saginaw. And it is gorgeous. Interviews, really beautiful photographs, some videos. But in essence, what he's done is he's helped remind the people of Saginaw that they live amongst the most fascinating people in the world, that there's nowhere else that contains these stories and these people that have, these hardships and all these just amazing things that people have done there. It's really internally focused. which again, I come back to: stop looking for external validation. Stop hoping that when everybody loves your town from outside, that you'll actually love yourself. It'll never work. You know, we have to love, as Mr. Rogers said, like, until we love ourselves, nobody else can love us. And that's what storytelling really is lifting up those amazing people that live in your town as a reminder of, we are great. We have done great things. We are capable of incredible, we're capable of doing incredible things. And that's something that we should hold up and share and be really, really proud of. So I think storytelling can have a huge impact if done the right way. But it's such a good reminder that, the people that live here are amazing, and let's celebrate ourselves.
Jeff, is your washer squawking at you?
In fact, the dishwasher did just recently squawk at me, but it's okay now.
So we're right at 2 o'clock, and Jeff, do you have a little more time to stick around and hang out? Great. And as Devin said, we'll have the recording made. So if you have to skip out now, thanks for joining us. Check out the recording on YouTube. Jeff, what if someone wants to get in direct contact with you? What's the easiest way to do that?
Sure. My website is Revitalize or Die. So pretty easy. I've got my phone number on there, my email on there. I'm pretty active on my Facebook page. You can message me through there. So yeah, pretty easy to get in touch.
Plus, you can order a copy of the book from your website. Right?
That's probably that's the best way to get in touch. Please do. I mean, it's really exciting, and I hope everybody picks it up and reads all the amazing words.
Any other questions, Devin?
We have a couple. How many more do you want to do?
Go ahead and do another one.
Okay. Next question, Jeff, is: do you know of examples where the downtown revamp group were able to take an old central building, such as a JCPenney store, that had sat empty and turned it into a destination event space for community gatherings, music, and maybe dancing, to change the downtown, rolling up the rugs at 5 p.m. every day?
Yeah, Piqua. I mean, Piqua is the one of the best examples of that. The Fort Piqua Hotel sat empty for 20 or 30 years, and people wanted to tear it down. And I think if I recall correctly, that somebody in the community, in essence, photoshopped the building out, put a parking lot in a surface lot where it was, and it ran in the paper, and people were like, oh God, that can't happen. And now I would assume that that's probably the biggest attraction in Piqua. Like it does all those things. So yeah, I would look at Piqua. And speaking of Piqua, I saw that Lorna's retiring, so certainly miss her. She was amazing. But yeah, that's a great example of how one building can make a huge difference.
Yeah, Lorna is or left Piqua, but she is now part of Heritage Ohio staff. So we are so excited. So literally, there's decades of knowledge on the downtown revitalization side of things. It's exciting. So you talk about apathy. So there are going to be folks who, it doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to change. But I don't think you're talking about reversing apathy as far as something magic's going to happen and 100% of the population is going to buy into things. What's a realistic process of how that works? Do you focus on the people who are concerned, but they just haven't had a reason to love their downtown?
Yeah, love the question. And so I want to reiterate that, like, it's okay to accept that. It's healthy to say something's gone wrong. It is perfectly fine to say our community is apathetic, but be honest about the problem. Because if you're not honest, don't go to the doctor and say I feel fine if something's wrong. Like, it's okay to be honest about that problem, but understand then that, like, it's a different set of tools to solve. It's going to take different solutions. But what I think about with apathy is, like, really, it's hard to care about something run down. Like literally when we look at something, we can tell in our brain if something's wrong. Like you can look at an unhealthy person and you register, it's their color or it's something about their skin that doesn't look right. Same with a building. Deterioration is unsettling to our mind. And when you see something that isn't being tended to, something that isn't being taken care of, it starts to affect our, we can tell, and it's unsettling. We don't like it and we avoid those things. So when the converse is true, like just making something a little bit nicer makes it easier to care about. Stop wanting everybody to care about rundown things. That's nonsense. We shouldn't keep thinking that way. Stop trying to get everybody engaged so we can make the community nicer. That's backwards. Make the community nicer, then everybody's going to get engaged. Like everybody loves a fixed up building. 2 people love a rundown building. Everybody loves a classic car, a pristine classic car, but only a handful of weirdos like the junker. So the cure to apathy is making things nice, literally like making all the built infrastructure nicer. More flowers, more plants, more pretty, more pretty things. Like just everything that you do has to be above average. I always think of Donovan Ripka made that point. Like if you're building something and it's not above average, you're investing in decline. So just be relentless in making everything a little nicer, because eventually that adds up. It's what's it, Atomic Habits, where James Clear, like you can't change yourself in a day. You can't become a different person, but if you get 1% better every day, at the end of the year, you've transformed. So you're not going to be able to overhaul your community today, but if you spend, if it gets 1% better, if you're, a few flowers here, a few, scrape paint there, a few new awnings here or there, over time, that really becomes something. That's something where the apathy starts to dissipate one person at a time, where people say, and look, it's a trajectory thing too. Like if your community is at a 0, you don't have to get to a 10. Getting to a 1 is going to feel good. That's progress. Like if you're in terrible shape and you go to the gym for a few months, but you notice in the mirror, like, hey, like I'm looking better. That's the best feeling in the world. You don't have to be, a fitness god or goddess, but like being a little bit better, seeing progress and noticing the result is going to be enough to propel you to go from a 1 to a 2. That's a trajectory. That's exciting. That's momentum and progress. So just like be relentless with this idea of getting a little bit better, because people notice and it feels good, and people are going to gravitate towards something that feels good.
So it's interesting that for all the money they cost, and how complicated they can be, these silver bullet quick fixes are like that's the easy thing to do. But it hardly ever makes a real difference in the community. But I guess, I don't know, are there any exceptions to the rule? Have there been silver bullets, quick fixes that have actually done the job, or is it just something that it's got to go hand in hand with all of the incremental work and hard work every day?
I just don't think that progress works that way. I mean, cities are just like people. Cities are like people, and there's not one thing that any of us could do to become, like you can't learn Spanish overnight, or you can't get in shape overnight. Like you just can't revitalize a city in one project, and I have seen where a lot of things fall into place and a lot of things happen, and then there's a big windfall, like maybe a big project happens, but that usually doesn't come out of nowhere. That usually was a lot of things being done in the background, a lot of positive direction that all kind of coalesces around maybe something big. But no, that's just what people like to sell. It's fun and sexy to sell. Here's your solution: this parking deck, this civic center, this plan, etc. This magic diet pill, this shake weight will be what fixes it. And it's like, that's fun because it circumvents the hard truth, which is like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of long, hard, sucky work. That's no fun, but sadly, like, yeah, that's the truth of it with any facet of our lives. Like just a bunch of work.
So I'm curious, in your book you outline what you call, what is it, 5 civic pride categories. So someone who reads that and is familiar with Main Street will see some similarities to the 4-point approach. So I'm curious, are your 5 civic pride categories a corollary to the 4-point approach? Is it something that can replace it? Tell us a little bit more about that.
It wasn't really meant to be sort of a replacement to the 4-point approach. I think organizationally, I guess that I was looking less at revitalization, more of solving this issue of civic apathy. And so it wasn't really trying to tackle necessarily the same thing. It's like I think that they go hand in hand. A community that grows prouder is certainly going to be less apathetic. A community that revitalizes will go through the same, but I wasn't looking at it from the same lens. But yeah, I see some overlap. Obviously, aesthetics is a huge part of combating apathy and fostering pride, which, your design committee. Identity is kind of, it touches on the promotional side, but not that much. Honestly, I think it's more about traditions, and some of it is kind of the branding stuff. Standards, again, might be towards design, but no, I wasn't really thinking about it in those terms. And yeah, I guess while there's overlap, it's not necessarily the same. So I don't have a good answer.
No, I think it's a big project. I think there's room for figuring out other ways to focus in on very specific areas, right? I mean, you don't say, well, this sweeps it away. This just makes the overall process maybe better.
Right. And I guess I get a little frustrated in this field of like planners speaking to planners and it being technical. Like, I think cities are just a composite of the characteristics of everybody that lives in them. And so I'm trying to use language that's much more human focused, like that's more emotional, because we're led to believe that it's incredibly technical and only a few experts can unlock the magic, like can pull back the magic curtains of how to revitalize a community. And if you know the acronyms, like, no, there's no expertise needed. If you've been to a place that makes you feel good, then okay, you figured it out. Like if you enjoy something, that's probably something that everybody else enjoys. So I was more intentional about trying to use very like human language that we all understand, how an identity affects us and how, we all understand how apathy feels or pride feels. So I think that was more the gist, is that this is just emotional stuff. It's emotional work. And if you focus more on how people feel in your community, you really have an insight into everything.
Devin, are there any more questions?
Yes, there are. I just threw into the chat link or the chat box the link to our YouTube page for everyone. Also include that in the message that we send out to later to everyone, but in case anyone wants to bookmark it now, it's in there. Let me scroll to the next question. Scrolls super wonky. All right. Next question is, we have a huge absent LLC issue with traditional retail and mixed-use historic buildings. What tools have you seen used by municipalities, land banks for nonprofits that have successfully transformed property to responsible ownership? We've looked at board of revisions, tax foreclosure, receiverships, etc., but we've struggled with the amount of time for acquisition. Sometimes these exceed years in the making.
So I'm less of an expert in the area of kind of the land banks and the receivership and the transfer of property. I don't know the legality of all that, but I know that the tool that I've always liked the most is the vacant property registry. And it doesn't necessarily get the property in somebody else's hands, but typically it gets the property out of the irresponsible owner's hands. And to me, that's sort of the biggest step. It's that, and I know that's been passed in a lot of communities, Sandusky, Millersburg, to name a few, and I think quite a bit more since my departure. But yeah, the vacant property just really makes it uncomfortable. It makes it painful. Like in essence, that those property owners aren't going to change their behavior until they have an incentive, until it's too painful, until you kick them in the wallet so hard that they're like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. This is a hassle. And at that point, then it's possible for somebody to come in and assume that property or buy that property and make something of it. But like, yeah, don't let them off the hook. Go after them with all you have, because we do this thing where it's like, oh, well, property rights, we don't want to infringe on their property rights. Like, you've got it all backwards. The property rights was upheld by the courts, was defended by the Supreme Court under the guise of protecting property value. What we were trying to establish is that if somebody fixed up their property, they had the right for not to have their, the value undercut by somebody next door, not, like doing something damaging to it. So the idea is that we're not trying to protect deadbeats and say, you can do whatever you want with your property. We're trying to protect the people that have invested. We're trying to protect those that have made a substantial financial investment, not to put all that money at risk, because that's towards the greater good. So stop listening to when people start, oh, how dare you tell me what to do with my property? Like, no, we have every right. There's a safety component, but there's also an economic development component. There's a property rights component. There's all these other components that go with taking care of your property. Like, and it's a funny thing that we do. We get it when it comes to residential. Like, oh yeah, of course I don't want my neighbor to have a car on blocks, or of course they, need to mow their lawn every few months. And you would expect that you could pick up the phone and call the city and say, hey, that my neighbor's house is falling apart and it's really starting to affect me. Like, yeah, but if a downtown building is falling apart, it's affecting all of you. Damn right, somebody should go out and do something about it. So I'd start making the case for being very punitive with those property owners and force them to sell.
I think about it from the perspective of there being two R words when it comes to private property. If you have the right to private property, there's also the responsibility that comes with that privilege. And when you don't uphold your responsibility to that right, you should, by virtue, lose some of the privileges that you had for it. You talk about when a property owner doesn't fix up a building, and it's like, if I've got a nice building that's worth $100,000, and over the course of 20 years, my neighbors on either side of me allow their buildings to go to pot, or the buildings are demoed, and my $100,000 building becomes an $80,000 valued building. Where is my recourse for finding or getting back that $20,000 that's lost? And someone can be a good property owner. So it's just an important point to make.
The way I like to talk about it, that usually it gets a little bit better response. Like, regulations are just laws. They're laws for business. We talk about regulations in this different manner and vilify them, but it's like, no, those are just laws. Like, what are you not going to have a speed limit? Like, well, I don't like speed limits. I don't want to follow it. I'm gonna, speed limits are regulations that I don't like, and I'm gonna go and complain about to the city. Like, no, it's a law. Laws were put in place because we decided to have a standard. Okay, our standard is that you can only drive this fast. Our standard is that if a window breaks, that you replace it, because this community depends, its livelihood and its sense of self depends on that standard. The only way that we can maintain, our health is through a standard. The only way that we can get better is by having a standard. So the idea that we're going to drop our standards to appease one person, like, you're hurting everybody. You're hurting every property owner by not enforcing the standards. But regulations are just laws. So if we're just going to throw those out, if we, oh well, I don't like building regulations, then throw them all out. Like, let's get rid of them all and see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. This has really been fun, to pick your brain and to get your thoughts once again on the finer points of revitalizing your downtown, and how to jumpstart your efforts, and how to sweep out the apathy and bring back the senses of civic pride. So Devin, maybe if there's one more question.
Sure. Last question here. We have a downtown improvement district funding a main street that is funded by businesses. We have other commercial streets that have fewer businesses, and word is residents would not help with the funding. Any experience with neighborhood funding these types of activities?
Wow, we ended with a real doozy. That's a tough one. Yeah, I think that they're, as far as like residential neighborhoods funding them, I don't know that there's any sort of mechanism that can be put in place, I think would have to be all voluntary. If I'm getting your question right at all, I think that you could ask people to support it through donations or through membership as a way, because it's going to help improve their quality of life. It's going to raise their property value, et cetera. And I think that you can make a compelling case for that and give people that opportunity. But if you're asking if there's any sort of government sanctioned kind of funding mechanism for residents to the equivalent of a TIF or a SID or a bid or anything like that. Like, no, I don't believe there is anything like that.
And I guess we should ask one final question here. What should we expect to see from Commissioner Siegler in his new role?
Interesting. Well, I've kind of jumped in with both feet. So I was at I've got a 3-hour budget meeting to join. So I'm still elect, but I'm trying to figure it all out. But I'm a big believer. What I want to bring to the role is a couple things. One is that idea of standards. Like, we have to be relentless in making sure that we maintain everything. Like, don't build anything new until we can take care of what we already have. Make sure that everything is nice as it can possibly be. Make sure that all the little details are taken care of, that a broken sidewalk has to get fixed, a dead plant has to be, like, I think we just need to be relentless on making sure that our surroundings in this community are always nice, because that's what makes people feel good. It's what makes them feel a sense of attachment. It's likely what's going to keep them in the community and attract more people and raise property values and the tax base, et cetera. Simultaneously, I think that every municipality is going to have to really reduce car dependency, and start to change its infrastructure, because I just don't think going forward that there's going to be as much driving. I think people want to move away from ownership. It's done an incredible amount of damage to our world, but it's also just growing less popular. I think that it's people are realizing owning a car is expensive. It's not fun. It's a lot of work. And then in general, if you look at where property values are the highest, if you look at where, tourism rates are the highest, it's in walkable communities, it's walkable neighborhoods. The fact that, I think it was Ed McMahon that pointed out, it's going to take another 30 years to build out the demand for to meet the demand for walkable housing. So that's something I really want to focus on is how do we reduce car dependency in my particular community? How do we make walking and biking safer, easier, and just make maybe it's become easier for a household to go down from 2 cars to 1. So those are really what I kind of want to focus on, is basically upholding that standard and improving the pedestrian landscape.
We look forward to hearing about the progress you make for that. Jeff's new book, it's still new, right?
I think so. Yeah, it's I got a year at least of saying new, I hope.
Your City is Sick, available from his website or wherever you buy books and whatnot. So Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks to all of our participants.
Oh, real quick, I want to say,
joining us.
Really
sorry, I'm cutting you off. No, you're done.
No, really good to get to chat with you. And also, I saw a lot of names that I recognized from, I guess, going back to 2016 when I was still with Heritage Ohio. So yeah, I miss a bunch of you. And so it's good to see some familiar names and hope the Ohio Main Street program keeps carrying on. So thanks for having me on.
Great to hear. You laid a foundation in your time with Heritage Ohio that is being built on today. And like we say, you have to start with a good foundation, and we got that with your service to Heritage Ohio. So thank you very much.
Much appreciated.
So, folks, we have webinars on a monthly basis. We have trainings that happen. Check out our weekly e-news. Check out our website, screw that up. Check out our website, heritageohio.org. for more information about what we have coming up soon. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.